What if the most devastating Vietnam War films were deliberately buried by studios because they showed American soldiers committing war crimes, breaking under PTSD, and Vietnamese civilians paying the ultimate price? Truths too raw for the post-war myth of heroism. These 10 high-rated but forgotten masterpieces deliver unflinching combat realism, soul-crushing psychological fallout, and perspectives Hollywood still avoids. From an Oscar-winning documentary that gut-punched the nation to an Australian SAS hell ride and a found-footage nightmare that feels like stolen military footage. This video will destroy every sanitized Vietnam movie you thought you knew. Ekarts and Minds, 1974. The bombshell almost no one remembers is that this Oscar-winning documentary was yanked from theaters in multiple cities after it aired graphic testimony from a Vietnamese farmer whose family was napalmed and a U.S. soldier admitting we were the bad guys. With studio executives terrified, it would tank public support for the war just months after the fall of Saigon. Director Peter Davis spent years smuggling 16mm footage out of Vietnam and the U.S., interviewing everyone from General Westmoreland, who casually called Vietnamese Orientals who don't value life, to anti-war protesters and returning POWs, suffering breakdowns on camera. The film doesn't just show combat. It dissects the American psyche through raw, unfiltered interviews that reveal systemic racism, sexual violence by troops, Hobbin and the My Lai level cover-ups. It won Best Documentary in 1975, but was immediately blacklisted from network TV reruns for decades because it humanized the enemy too effectively. The psychological toll on viewers was so severe that veterans walked out sobbing. It shifted public opinion more than any narrative film, yet remains buried in streaming algorithms today. Its impact? It proved documentaries could be more dangerous than Hollywood blockbusters, costing distributors millions in lost revenue while forcing a generation to confront the war's moral bankruptcy. The Deer Hunter, 1978. The controversy nobody discusses is that The Deer Hunter was picketed by Vietnamese American groups for depicting Vietnamese characters as sadistic gamblers, forcing Russian roulette on POWs. Scenes based on unverified rumors that director Michael Cimino admitted were symbolic rather than factual, yet the film still won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. It follows 3 Pennsylvania steelworkers from their blue-collar wedding to the hell of Khe-Sanh and back, showing one friend's legs blown off, another's heroin addiction, and the protagonist's mental collapse in a single, unbroken hunting metaphor that lasts over 3 hours. Cimino shot in real Thai refugee camps and used actual veterans as extras who broke down reliving trauma on set. The psychological devastation is the core. It doesn't glorify combat, but shows how the war hollowed out small-town America through suicide, divorce, and unspoken shame. Overlooked today because it's 3 hours long and unflinching, it still holds a 86% on Rotten Tomatoes and was praised by veterans for capturing the survivor's guilt no other film touched. Its impact destroyed careers. Christopher Walken's breakout came with real PTSD flashbacks and forced audiences to realize the war never ended for those who survived it. Coming Home, 1978. Few realize that Coming Home was Jane Fonda's most personal anti-war statement. She financed part of it herself after visiting veterans' hospitals and witnessing paralyzed soldiers begging for death, and then cast real disabled Vietnam vets as extras who improvised their most brutal therapy scenes. The film follows a Marine captain's wife who falls for a paraplegic vet while her husband fights overseas, exposing the VA's neglect, sexual dysfunction after spinal injuries, and the anti-war movement's internal fractures. Hal Ashby shot in actual Long Beach firing State hospitals with no Hollywood gloss. The love scenes between Fonda and John Voight were so raw they were nearly NC-17. The psychological toll is relentless. It shows returning soldiers' impotence, rage, and suicide attempts without a single combat sequence. Overlooked now because it's a quiet character drama, it still won 3 Oscars and was the first major film to center disabled veterans' sexuality and the hypocrisy of support the troops rhetoric. Its impact? When it helped pass VA reform bills and destroyed the myth that all vets were either heroes or villains, leaving audiences haunted by the line, "I just want to be a hero for 5 minutes." The Boys in Company C, 1978. The hidden truth is that The Boys in Company C was pulled from U.S. distribution for years after Marine Corps veterans complained it showed their own officers as incompetent drug users who sacrificed men for body counts, scenes drawn from real after-action reports the director smuggled out. It follows one Marine platoon from brutal boot camp through Tet Offensive combat, using handheld cameras and actual Vietnam footage for a documentary-style grit that feels like stolen war reels. The film never glorifies a single firefight. Instead, it tracks how idealism turns to fragging threats, heroin addiction, and moral collapse in under 90 minutes. Overlooked because it lacked big stars and was released the same year as The Deer Hunter, it still earns praise from veterans for its authentic slang, radio chatter, and the final voiceover admitting we were all just meat. The impact on cast and crew was lasting, and several actors suffered nightmares after filming live fire sequences with real Marines. And it remains one of the few films that dares to show U.S. troops committing casual atrocities while questioning why they were even there. The Odd Angry Shot, 1979. The secret almost never mentioned is that this Australian SAS film was banned from U.S. military bases because it portrayed elite soldiers as bored, racist, honest, and more terrified of their own officers than the Viet Cong. A perspective so unflinching that Australian veterans called it the most honest Vietnam movie ever made. It follows a squad of Special Air Service troopers on a secret mission, using black humor and real SAS training footage to show boredom turning into madness, friendly fire deaths, and the absurd waste of elite troops hunting ghosts in the jungle. No heroic rescues, just leeches, heat exhaustion, and the constant threat of being odd angry shot by their own side. Overlooked outside Australia because it has no American stars and zero Hollywood polish, it still holds cult status among veterans for its brutal realism and the final monologue admitting the war changed nothing. The psychological toll is shown through soldiers cracking under the silence between contacts, making it required viewing for anyone who thinks only U.S. films captured the war's futility. 84C Mopic in 1989. The jaw-dropping detail is that 84C's Mopic was shot entirely in found footage style by a real Vietnam combat cameraman using authentic 16mm military cameras, making it feel like stolen Pentagon footage that was never meant to be seen. So realistic that test audiences thought it was actual documentary until the credits rolled. It follows a 6-man reconnaissance team on a classified mission through the eyes of their cameraman Mopic, capturing everything from mundane boredom to a night ambush where half the squad is wiped out in one continuous take. The film was made on a $500,000 budget with real veterans as advisors who broke down during rehearsals. Overlooked because it predated the found footage craze by decades and had zero marketing, it still earns 100% on Rotten Tomatoes for its claustrophobic tension and the final revelation that the footage was recovered from a dead soldier. Its impact? It proves low-budget indie films could be more terrifying than $100 million blockbusters, forcing viewers to confront how disposable young men really were. Casualties of War, 1989. The never-discussed bombshell is that Casualties of War is based on the real 1966 incident where 5 U.S. soldiers kidnapped, raped, and murdered a 17-year-old Vietnamese girl named Phan Thi Mao, a war crime that led to court-martials. Yet the Army tried to bury the story until a whistleblower sergeant risked his life to expose it. Nice Brian De Palma's film follows the lone soldier who refuses to participate, showing the gang rape in unflinching detail and the subsequent cover-up that reached all the way to battalion command. Shot on location in Thailand with real Vietnamese extras, it faced studio pushback for being too ugly. Overlooked despite starring Michael J. Fox and Sean Penn because it refuses any redemption arc for the perpetrators, it remains the most morally devastating Vietnam film ever made. The psychological toll on the cast was severe. Penn stayed in character for weeks, and its impact still divides veterans. Some call it treasonous, others the only film that finally told the truth about what some men became in country. Heaven and Earth, 1993. The explosive secret is that Oliver Stone's Heaven and Earth is the only major Hollywood film told entirely from a Vietnamese woman's perspective, based on the real-life autobiography of Laylee Hayslip, who survived rape by Viet Cong, torture by South Vietnamese, and marriage to a psychotic U.S. Marine before becoming a peace activist in California. Stone spent years gaining her trust, filming in her actual Vietnamese village, using non-professional locals who had lived through the war. It shows the conflict through civilian eyes, Agent Orange birth defects, village massacres, and the slow destruction of an entire culture while American GIs treated the country like a playground. Overlooked because it came after Stone's more famous Platoon and Born on the 4th of July, it still holds an 80% critic score and was praised by Vietnamese audiences as the first Western film that didn't portray them as extras. The impact? It humanized the enemy so effectively that Hayslip received death threats from both sides, proving one film could rewrite history from the other side of the rifle. The Siege of Firebase. Gloria, 1988. The untold detail is that the Siege of Firebase Gloria was co-written and advised by real Vietnam veterans who fought the exact 1968 battle it depicts, using live ammunition and actual Huey helicopters to recreate the moment when 150 Marines held off 2,000 NVA soldiers for 5 days while command considered abandoning them. It shows Marines executing their own wounded to prevent capture, officers cracking under pressure, in the final hand-to-hand fighting with no John Wayne rescues. Director Brian Trenchard Smith shot it in the Philippines with a budget so low they reused the same explosions multiple times. Overlooked because it lacked stars and came out the same year as Platoon's Aftermath, it is still called the most accurate combat film by veterans on record. The psychological toll is relentless. One actor suffered real shell shock after a stunt gone wrong, and its impact was immediate. Marine Corps screening rooms still use it for training because it shows the war as the brutal meat grinder it actually was. A Bright Shining Lie, 1998. The final buried truth that still shocks is that A Bright Shining Lie is based on the real-life story of Lieutenant Colonel John Paul Vann, the Maverick U.S. advisor who knew the war was unwinnable from 1962 onward, lied to every president, and died in a helicopter crash after personally leading illegal operations. A story so damning the Pentagon fought for years to keep the book from being filmed. The HBO movie follows Van's secret affairs, his contempt for corrupt South Vietnamese generals, and his growing realization that America was losing to a peasant army. Shot with real military consultants who served under Van, it exposes the body count lies, fragging, and political betrayal from the highest levels. Overlooked because it was a TV movie with no theatrical release, it still won 3 Emmys and remains the most accurate portrait of the war's strategic insanity. Its impact? It forced viewers to realize the entire conflict was one man's bright shining lie repeated for 20 years, leaving an entire generation questioning every official narrative they were ever told. 199 words.